We're here really to hear from Dr. Ella Harris around the topic of enriching research analysis with interactive documentary design. And Ella has two research hats, really, as an academic researcher at Bath Spa University and also as a freelance researcher, collaborating with a range of partners. She specialises in researching crisis cultures and the use of creative methods. Ella's work focuses on and explores how creative and inventive approaches to research can activate a perceptual equipment needed in times of crisis. And among those inventive methods is the use of interactive documentary design, which is what Ella is going to speak with us about today, focusing on how the process of designing an iDoc can enrich analysis. And if you're interested in these methods and want to learn more, I have no doubt that your interest will be very much sparked by Ella's presentation and the activities that we're going to do together. Then do check out Ella's book, Encountering the World with iDocs, which has recently been published by Policy Press. I will drop a couple of links in there around Ella's contacts that you can check out later. Before I pass over to Ella to start this session, please do use the chat to share any reflections or comments and also any questions that you have for Ella along the way. And I will collate those and we'll have a discussion towards the end of the session. But that's it from me. I'll pass over to Ella, who is going to talk in depth about interactive documentary design.
Great, fantastic. Well, it's great to be here today. Really excited to talk to you all about interactive documentary. Thanks for the lovely introduction, Christina. So I'll just flick through these slides. So this presentation today is going to be kind of half an hour of me presenting, and then the kind of second half will be a chance for us to work with the ideas a little bit in an interactive format. But I'm going to start with just kind of an introduction to what iDocs are and a little bit about myself, and I'll go into thinking about how we can use interactive documentary as a way to analyze data, and then go into giving you guys a chance to try it out. So firstly, a bit about me. You've already heard a bit about me from Christina. As she said, I'm an academic researcher, but also a freelance creative researcher. So my work specialises in how we can use creative methods to understand and intervene in kind of complex and intersecting crises. And within that, I'm very interested in how we can use creative methods for data analysis. So I work with a variety of different creative methods to analyse data. So in the bottom right on the slides here is a board game I'm creating at the moment, which we're creating to help us to analyse data about tiny housing in Texas. I'm also working on a project at Maynooth University, which is why I'm in Dublin a lot currently, which is a research creation project where we're making some kind of artworks to help us to understand housing and land data in Dublin. So I'm really interested in how creative processes can help us to sort of analyse and make sense of academic topics. But today we're focusing on interactive documentary, which is one of the kind of key methods I focused on in my work so far to date. And I'm going to show you how iDoc design and iDoc making, but not necessarily even completing a digital artifact, but just going through the design process conceptually, can really enrich data analysis. So firstly, I'd love to just know like how much you guys know about creative data analysis and iDocs. So I'm going to go back into gallery view so I can see you all. Can I ask you to cover your screen with your thumb, sort of like this? Oh, where's my screen? There, like that. If you work with creative methods at all in your work. So if you go into gallery view and put your cameras on, you should be able to see everybody covering their screen with their thumb like that. And we'll get a sense of who's in the room. Or if you'd rather, you could put it into the chat and just put a yes or a no. But I'd love to know, do you work with creative processes in your work? So cover your screen if that's a yes. Okay, got a mix. Got a lot of cameras off. It's not really working. But stick it in the chat if you'd like to do. Okay, amazing. Kyle, fantastic. Okay, I'm seeing some creative researchers and some thumbs up. Amazing, fantastic. Okay, can we do the same thing now if you've heard of interactive documentary? Who knows what iDocs are? I know what iDocs are. Okay. Okay, we got some. Naseem, fantastic. Excellent. Okay, that's really helpful for me to know. So people have often not heard of iDocs. Okay, got a thumbs down over here. So that's because as a kind of media form, iDocs never really kind of took off. So interestingly, iDocs started as a kind of offshoot of documentary filmmaking. And they were meant to be this kind of new big thing for documentary filmmakers, but it never kind of really took off as a kind of media output. But what did happen is that they became really interesting to researchers, including myself. So iDocs are web-based, interactive, non-linear forms of non-fiction media. They can take a variety of different forms, but the kind of key principles is that they're interactive, they're non-linear, they're I can never say this, they're multi-perspectival, and they're immersive. So what that can look like in practice takes a range of different examples. So you get some kind of quite big budget projects. So the universe within, for example, in the top left corner is this beautiful iDoc where you pick an avatar. So you pick one of these three characters you can see on the screen, and they take you to see different film clips about people living in high rises in different parts of the world. Then you have other iDocs like 18 Days in Egypt in the right-hand corner here, which are more sort of bottom-up crowdsourced productions. So in 18 Days in Egypt, the organisers created a platform and they invited people to upload their own content, videos, photographs, text, documenting their experiences of the Arab Spring in Egypt. So in this situation, it's more of a kind of open source, crowdsourced form of documentary filmmaking. Then in the bottom left corner, we have Refugee Republic, which is an iDoc where you can follow these different routes through a map, and each route takes you through a series of different animated graphics and video clips and images that explore life within a refugee camp. Then in the bottom right, we have Seven Digital Deadly Sins, which is a production by The Guardian. And this one is a kind of interface where you can pick and choose different clips that explore what moral behavior looks like online. And you, as the audience, get a kind of chance to click and say whether you agree that these behaviors are immoral or not. So they take a range of different kind of formats, but the kind of commonalities are that they're interactive and they kind of collate multiple discrete pieces of content into one interface. So why do I think that iDocs are important now? So I'm interested in iDocs as a media form that give us the kind of perceptual equipment that we need to understand a time defined by intersecting crises. So as we're all painfully aware, we live in this time where there's a poly crisis. There's kind of all these different complex and tangled issues that as researchers, we need to untangle and need to make sense of, but can be really kind of complicated to understand, not least because increasingly knowledge itself is very fragmented, and what people know about the world and what they even think knowledge is becoming very kind of sort of diverse and fragmented. So in this era, I think iDocs can help us. And my take on that is influenced by something that Frederick Jameson says, where he talks about how as the world around us changes, we need new perception equipment to help us to make sense of those changes. So he says that if we as humans don't evolve our perceptual equipment, then we're going to get kind of lost in the changes of the world around us. And for Jameson, it's kind of digital, well, not digital, but any kind of creative media that can allow us to kind of reformulate our modes of perception. So if we look across history, media have always changed how we see the world. So with the novel was the first time that we thought about ourselves as protagonists, as kind of heroes in our own individual lives. So it sort of reformulated our understanding of ourselves and who we are in the world. And then kind of moving forward through time, we have the way in which the camera activated what Walter Benjamin calls the optical unconscious. And then we have moving image, which kind of changes how we think about time and movement. So this footage here is allegedly the first ever film footage. And this film footage helped people to understand how a horse gallops. So before this footage, they hadn't been able to kind of see the movement in enough detail because horses gallop so quickly. So film cameras kind of literally help people to understand the world in a way that wasn't available previously by kind of adding this layer of perceptual equipment. And then more recently, we have technologies like mobile phones, email, Wi-Fi, all these kind of social media apparatus that kind of change our sense of space and time and make us feel like we're kind of increasingly connected in this global village. So across history, there's been this sort of reformulation of perception in ways that kind of add to our understanding of the world. So my interest is in how we as researchers can sort of actively harness this. So this is a description of how media forms are kind of have changed how we see the world. But I think the opportunity here is to sort of deliberately cultivate the power of media to create the ways of seeing that we need to understand the changes in the world around us, and in particular to understand this kind of era defined by crisis. So in my work with iDocs, I'm very interested in what iDocs can offer to us as perceptual equipment. So, I'm on the wrong slide. There you go. So in terms of kind of how we can analyze with iDocs, in the book I've just written, I talk a bit about how making an iDoc forces us to ask particular questions of our research subject in a way that sort of opens up important analytical avenues. So what I sort of suggest is that the iDoc design process provides a kind of analytical framework. So each component of the iDoc prompts us to reflect on different dimensions of research subjects. So I break this down into sort of 5 key areas in the book, where I talk about temporal architecture, which is sort of the temporal structure of an iDoc. So what happens in what order, how fast and slow things happen, what you can and can't do in different sequences. Then spatial infrastructure, so the way in which different content is laid out on the screen, number of pages there are, how those pages connect to each other, that kind of stuff. And then the aesthetics, and then the interactive functions it has, and then lastly, the kind of co-creative or multiperspectival elements, so the way in which iDoc collates different viewpoints into its interface. So I talk about how designing an iDoc and designing kind of each of these 5 dimensions of an iDoc will prompt you to ask questions of your research subject that sort of open up really important analytical dimensions. So I'm going to talk just quickly about different iDocs in the commercial realm and different iDocs that I've made as well to kind of show you how this works in practice. And then we're going to get a chance to give this a go. So just to kind of whiz through each of these different areas. So in terms of kind of temporal architecture, there's some interesting iDocs here that sort of show you how iDocs in their form can kind of make an interesting commentary on the temporalities of an issue. So the iDoc in the top left here is called Insomnia Journal. This is an iDoc about insomnia, and interestingly, you can only access it in the middle of the night. So you have to book an appointment to kind of come back at sort of 3 a.m., 4 a.m., something like that, in order to engage with the iDoc. So in this way, the kind of iDoc uses its temporal architecture to invite the kind of user into this nocturnal world with the insomniacs that it showcases. Then on the right, we have an iDoc called Hollow. And in this one, it's about a declining town. So a town where the population is gradually falling to 0. And in this iDoc, you kind of scroll through the contents. So you have to scroll down. And as you scroll down, you can see a little number of of the town's population, which changes as you go along. And interestingly, they kind of reverse the order here. So as you scroll, the town actually gets more populated. So what that does is kind of problematize this notion of decline by actually giving you a kind of richer picture of the town's history to kind of showcase the kind of the way in which even in the kind of situation of population decline, somewhere still is kind of alive with all these memories and important meanings. So those 2 examples, and I'll talk about temporary city a little bit later, are kind of good indicators of how you can sort of use the form of an iDoc to express the kind of logics or the sort of themes within a research topic. So as you're designing an iDoc, you're sort of asking yourselves questions around how can I best express the temporality of my research topic through my iDoc? So what's the kind of appropriate temporal design to showcase this subject? And kind of picking things like, for example, this functionality about watching it in the middle of the night, or like the scrolling function, kind of helps you to illuminate and elucidate those dimensions of your subject. So just kind of whizzing through some more examples to think about other dimensions. We have iDocs that play with the kind of spatial layout in order to express dimensions of their subjects here. So on the right-hand side, Gaza is a very famous iDoc about the war in Gaza. Here you have the kind of this split screen where you have to choose to watch clips of people on either side of the border. So there's kind of very clear way here in which the kind of central theme of this this documentary is expressed through the spatial layout of the screen. And on the left, Refugee Republic. This iDoc's interesting because it's premised on routes. So you pick a route and you follow the route to kind of see different pieces of content about this refugee camp. But importantly, the routes don't lead out of the camp, they only lead around the camp. So the kind of format of the infrastructure of the iDoc is a kind of commentary on how people get stuck in refugee camps and make their whole lives there. Because although they're about journeys, it's actually kind of very hard to kind of get out of this camp once you arrive there. So the kind of route format is a kind of play on this tension between stasis and mobility. And I won't go too much into depth in the other topics, but just thinking about interactivity, you have iDocs that sort of use their interactive functions to kind of show users their own agency or complicity within a subject. So, for example, I mentioned 7 deadly sins, where you have to kind of click to say if you condone or condemn a particular behavior, and this kind of invited you to think about your own implication, your own involvement in different digital behaviors, and also kind of to pass your own moral judgment in the way people do in online environments. And then at the top, we have an iDoc about how to start a financial crisis, where you have to kind of click through these statements about how financial crises are caused. And even if you don't agree with the statements, you have to click OK or happens everywhere or I agree to progress the documentary. So in this one, it kind of shows you your lack of agency in the context of economic crisis and how you're kind of forced to be complicit with the system, even if you don't like it. And then aesthetics can do the same thing. So you have iDocs where the aesthetics are kind of really important in having a kind of commentary on the issue that they're representing. So on the left here, we have an iDoc about migrant families, and the style of it is just kind of like quite childlike, sort of collage papery style. So here, the story it tells is a story about family and homes. It sort of foregrounds that dimension of the subject in order to kind of tell a particular version and kind of express particular themes in this story. And I'm just going to keep whizzing through. So in terms of multiperspectivity, we have iDocs that use this capacity of iDocs to pull multiple discrete pieces of content into one interface to foreground how there's kind of multiple versions of a story or multiple ways in which different people experience the same thing. So Athens Report and 18 Days in Egypt are both crowdsourced iDocs where people invited users to upload their own content. So in these cases, the format of the iDoc kind of contests and problematizes the idea that there is any one dominant narrative about a kind of major political or economic event, and instead sort of showcases that there's multiple perspectives, multiple renditions of this story. So in these different ways, iDocs kind of use their formal properties to pull out different themes, different ideas, different kind of important strands of the topics that they cover. So this is why in research, I think designing an iDoc can be really beneficial as a mode of analysis, because as you're designing these 5 different dimensions of an iDoc, you have to kind of work out you have to kind of ask yourself complicated questions about your research topic to be able to express those dimensions in the iDoc. So I'll talk about 2 projects that I've worked on just quickly to show how that works. So this is the Temporary City, which is an iDoc I made about pop-up culture in London when I was doing my PhD. And in this iDoc, I kind of made the iDoc in order to analyze the data I had. So I'd done about 3 months of ethnographic research in London, where I'd gone to different pop-up sites, I'd taken video footage, taken photographs, and sort of immersed myself in these settings in order to understand the meanings of pop-up culture. And I was especially interested in pop-up culture's relationship to the financial crash in 2008 and what it said about the kind of redevelopment of the city in the aftermath of that crisis. So here, the process of making the iDoc was a process of kind of analysing my findings. So I had to kind of ask myself questions like, how should pop-up culture be represented on a map, also in a spatial interface, and I came to this map functionality where you can't see this because it's a still image, but on the map in the iDoc, these icons come and go. So the little orange and blue icons here are icons where you can click and see a film clip, and as you're experiencing the iDoc, the icons sort of disappear and arrive in the map at kind of random intervals of time. So this kind of mimics the way in which pop-up culture is this kind of erratic, unpredictable geography. So by designing this, I kind of helped myself to sort of think about what is the temporal nature of pop-up. Okay, it's about spontaneity, it's about flux, it's about a kind of urban fabric that's defined by instability. So the design process helped me to sort of clarify that spatial temporality in pop-up culture. And then there was a time in the iDoc process where I was working with a web developer and they said to me, okay, so we have this iDoc, but how do you want it to end? What should happen to the user? Should they just kind of hang out in this iDoc forever? Should they just wait till all the clips are gone and it finishes? So this question about how the iDoc should end prompted me to think, well, what would be the kind of appropriate ending for the iDoc, given what I know about pop-up culture? And because pop-up culture is very implicated in gentrification, I thought actually the appropriate ending would be that you get kicked out of the iDoc because they're about to redevelop the whole space as fancy flats. Because in reality, that's what happens in London. Is pop-up places come in, gentrify a site, and it becomes sort of high-end apartments. So in the bottom right corner of this slide, you can see the kind of screen that I'd signed for the end of the iDoc, where you get kicked out and you're told you can come back and see the showrooms for the flats if you'd like to. So again, the need to design an ending into the iDoc forced me to ask this question of myself that helped to kind of clarify this important political dimension of pop-up culture. So that was an example where I designed the iDoc by myself, but I've also worked on projects where I worked with participants to design an iDoc. So this is the Lockdown game, which is an iDoc I designed with a group of Londoners. And here they sort of work together as a team to design it. And I watched them and supported and helped them to kind of make decisions and guided them through the different stages of iDoc design. So in this instance, how this added to my data analysis was that my observation of their discussions gave me a really rich insight into their kind of individual understandings of lockdown, but also into how they as a group negotiated that. So I was able to kind of watch their debates and discussions about the correct design of the iDoc, what the right aesthetic should be like, what interactive functions there should be. And by kind of observing that process, I was able to kind of get insights into what they as individuals and as a group thought about lockdown and its governance. And then when they finished the iDoc, I was able to analyze it as a kind of product, a kind of output in order to kind of make conclusions about the group's experience of lockdown. So by analyzing the iDoc that they designed, I drew in kind of interesting conclusions about their changing understandings of what freedom meant during the lockdown period. So there's two different examples there of how you can work with iDocs in analysis. One, which is about kind of designing or making an iDoc about your own research in order to kind of clarify and elucidate different dimensions of it. And the other, which is about working with participants in a kind of co-creative setting where you're observing their design process, and through that are kind of able to analyze what they as individuals and as a group are experiencing. So what I want us to do now is have a go at thinking about how an iDoc design process could enrich your own data analysis. So what I've done is I've created a template where I ask kind of a series of different prompt questions which help you to think about what an iDoc about your research topic might be like. So they're split into these different sections we just discussed. So into well, we start with processes. So that's about kind of the who, the where, the when, and the how of the iDoc design process. But then the sections we've discussed come in. So like the temporal architecture, the spatial infrastructure, the aesthetics, the interactive dimensions, and going through these different sections helps you to kind of think about your research topic from angles you might not have previously considered. So what I want us to do is Christina's going to put us into small breakout groups. And I have got, let me just put it in the chat, I've got a link to a Miro board here. If I just come out here. So from this Miro board, you should be able to see on the Miro board, firstly, a link to that kind of prompt template, but also the template in PDF form. And you should be able to download that PDF from the Miro board, but I'm also going to put it into the chat here as well, if I can. Let me just check I can do that. Okay, there we go. It's in the chat now. So in your breakout groups, what I want you to do is go through this template. Obviously, you're not going to have time to ask yourself all the questions. We're going to have about sort of 10 minutes-ish, 10 to 12 minutes. But just kind of pick questions that you think are especially interesting and ask yourself those questions of a research topic. So if you're working in a small group, say sort of 3 or 4 of you, what you want to do is pick one person who's in the middle of some research. So maybe they're kind of currently working on a project, maybe they've just started the project, maybe they just finished the project. And that person can explain the research topic to the rest of the group. And then as a group, you can go through this template and ask yourself questions. So for example, if you were, say you're working on a project about experiences of NHS care, you might say to yourself, okay, so I'm going to ask myself a question from the temporal architecture section, which is there an order in which your audience should be encouraged to look at pieces of content, or should it be up to them? And I think, okay, so in my iDoc about NHS care, there definitely should be an order people are forced to look at the content in, because my experience with NHS from my research is that people are forced to kind of do a lot of waiting, to not have control of their own timeframes for treatment. So the appropriate temporality for the iDoc would be one where audiences are kind of forced down a particular avenue in terms of the order they can see content in. So kind of like that, you go through different questions and ask yourself what would be the most relevant way to represent this in an iDoc. And that process should help you to kind of start analysing your research topic from different angles. Before we go into our breakout groups, are there any questions about that? Feel free to put them in the chat if that's easier.
Lots of people appear to be in the mirror board already, so...
Okay, excellent. So in the mirror board, you'll see that I've put some space where you can make notes as well. So if you wanted to, oh, I've lost it now. If you want to make notes in the mirror board, then please do. It'd be great to be able to see what everybody's working on. Even if you just want to kind of add some post-it notes to one of these little rectangles to kind of give us some highlights of your discussion, that would be really helpful. So as I said, don't try and get through every question of the prompt sheet because it's quite long. Just kind of pick and choose ones that are immediately interesting to you. And we will come back into the main room in about sort of 11 minutes at 4:40 to kind of see what people have found. And if at any point you're stuck or confused, feel free to put a message in the chat and I'll endeavour to help.
Fab. I'm going to open the rooms now. So you should be able to see in the Zoom space an invitation to your room. I think you're good to go, Ella.
Excellent. Okay, thank you everybody for trying that out. It'd be fantastic just to hear from different groups about how they got on and kind of how you find the process, if it kind of uncovered anything interesting for you about your research. Yeah, would anybody like to jump in, or should we sort of go around the screen a little bit and sort of pick nominees? Anybody want to jump in with a particularly burning or interesting point? I don't see my whole screen here.
I would like to jump in. I had some problems.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
had a lot of difficulties because I didn't understand the how it worked, the iDocs. I really apologize. It looks very interesting because my research will be it is in at Middlesex University. My colleague is over there, Joe is over there, and it's to do with photo voice and children's viewings of social identity in terms of social identity. And I didn't know how to use this because I would like to use something like this within the context of my research, but I wasn't really sure how to use the whole you know, the thinking space, and there's just it was
On the mirror board, you mean? Yeah, I saw you kind of resizing your post-it note a lot.
Everyone was moving about, like everyone's doing nothing. I have no idea.
That's okay.
I tried even to put a post-it like I worked on something. I don't know.
Don't worry.
I was in the same room with Sarah, and we shared the difficulties of not understanding what we were supposed to do. So I apologize.
Oh no, that's fine. Did you get a chance to look at the prompt tool at all before you tackled the mirror board, or were you kind of?
Yeah, I did look. I even printed off the the infrastructure so I could understand and get my head around. But probably it's just the concept in itself is really good, and I would love to use it, but I just can't get my mind to work on that mirror board and whatever.
Okay, yeah. Don't worry about the mirror board. I think the mirror board was just kind of help you to kind of write down notes, but it's more about just kind of looking through the questions in the prompt and thinking about those questions in relation to your research. But if you didn't get time to do that, that's cool. You can do that in your own time as well if you'd like to explore that further.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does anybody get as far as having to think about some of the question prompts? Feel free to shout out.
Hi, could I say something?
Yeah, of course.
Hey, yeah, I think, well, we didn't really get to talking about the prompts. To be honest, I felt a little bit overwhelmed because I hadn't seen this template document before.
There's
And
a
I
lot
was
of them, yeah.
there's so many questions. But personally, I'm doing my PhD currently.
Yes, I know.
And yeah, you know, there's other people doing it.
Good to see you.
And yeah, it's really nice to see you too. So I wanted to use creative methods in my research as well. So I wanted to do my project is about people that are living off grid, and I'm researching themes of the climate crisis, how people think about it and feel about it, and then it's also about feelings of home and homemaking practices. Just a little bit of background. So I wanted to do this thing where I did home tours with people and to film that as a sort of creative practice, but in reality that was just quite difficult to do. So I ended up having lots of like little clips of different people's homes and spaces, but not really like any sort of interviews on camera or stuff like that. And I'm at a point where I just don't really know what to do with all that footage, because I think it is nice to have. And then I saw that you were doing this talk about iDocs, and I thought, oh, maybe that's an avenue I can go on.
Yeah.
But what did I want to say? Oh yeah, I think when I'm thinking about this, I often think about making an iDoc as a way of disseminating research findings rather than as a tool for analysis. And I was wondering sort of how you can navigate that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good point. I think people often think about sort of creative methods around kind of outputs rather than processes. But I think, so for me, it kind of boils down to this idea that sort of the medium is the message. So the sort of design of the interface itself conveys meaning as much as the content does. So, for example, I don't know, obviously, the kind of details of your research, but I would love to find out more about how it's going. But if you presented all these different clips in a sort of blank screen, obviously the kind of clips would sort of speak for themselves. But in an iDoc, what you might want to do is sort of design the interface in a way that kind of helps you to convey different things within your topic. So, for example, I don't know if in the different clips that you have, there are kind of contradictions or commonalities, or do experiences kind of sit together harmoniously, or are there kind of conflicts in how people conceptualize their homes and their relationship to them? So I guess like asking yourself some of the questions in the prompts, as I say, the kind of questions, let me just share my screen again, but the questions around, for example, we're on the wrong tab. There we go. Let me just come back to the right page. So the questions around sort of spatial infrastructure, for example. So thinking about, would all your content be on one page? Would it be in different sections? How should users discover it? What should the layout be like? So for example, if you have kind of content where there's sort of, there might be different kind of archetypes potentially of people who live in this way. So you might have kind of different sections for different types of experience, or you might have a kind of divided interface, like the one we saw about the war, where you have kind of people who have different opinions on different sides of the interface. So the choices you make about the kind of spatial layout of your iDoc would kind of help you to analyze like sort of dimensions of the topic. So it's kind of like thinking about what's the appropriate way to convey this through the kind of the layout, the aesthetics, etc. of the iDoc as a kind of analytical process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I should just start probably by looking through the questions and thinking about just, I don't know, writing about first ideas of what comes to mind and having a look at the footage and
yeah, exactly. Something you probably could spend quite a long time on potentially, but I think even just kind of pulling out a couple of little questions can be quite helpful in sort of thinking about those different elements of your research.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. That's all right. Yeah, please go.
I'm Kyle. I know it's sometimes hard to figure out what my first name is by the spelling.
Kyle, yeah.
Yeah, Kylie or Kyle. But I go by Kyle. It's nice to thank you for this. This is really fascinating. And my head spinning various projects that I have going on. And with just what you were just saying, so do you see this as also a potential method, or where is it related at all to participatory action research?
It definitely can be.
It can be.
Yeah, so I think so in the kind of media studies scholarship around iDocs, there's a lot of excitement around how iDoc making can sort of be a way to kind of prompt people to make kind of changes in their local communities or kind of prompt political action. So for example, the iDoc that I worked on with the lockdown game, if I go back to it, in this iDoc, the participants I worked with, they were really concerned to make sure that people had a kind of a way through the iDoc to engage with things happening in their local communities that might improve the situation for people living under lockdown. So in the iDoc, there's sort of links you click on that go to kind of like, I don't know, like renters sort of anti-eviction protest movements, or to kind of community allotments, or to support groups for people living on their own during lockdown. So they kind of mobilized the iDoc format to kind of advocate for things that they thought were important in that sense. So iDoc making can be a kind of really good way to sort of collate experiences and then kind of communicate them in a way that sort of invites audiences to kind of share their own views or be part of something, or kind of work together for something. And especially iDocs like I think on 18 Days in Egypt and Athens report. So in these kind of more crowdsourced iDocs, here I guess I don't know if you call it kind of action research, but what they're trying to do is create a more nuanced narrative. So in a situation like the Greek debt crisis, like the Arab Spring, where there can be kind of quite sort of like dominant meta narratives about what it is that's happening, they invite people to kind of tell their own stories in order to kind of problematize and kind of contest the idea that there can be sort of one story. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily conventional action research, but it's very much around kind of changing discourses, changing narratives, and enlisting participants to kind of have their own voices central in that.
Thank you. And that was the other spinning hamster in my head. I work with narratives and the dominant and counter narrative, and I thought this was really fast, like not just reporting on it so it continues to live separately, but allowing it to interact and connect potentially in different ways. That
exactly.
was mine.
Yeah, thank you. And the nice thing about iDocs is because they're interactive, you can embed like a question form into them, or an option for people to upload their own comments or their own content to it. So there could be a sort of live resource where people kind of keep adding and iteratively kind of compiling more things into the iDoc interface as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Has anybody else got any kind of comments or questions, either comments on the activity or questions generally about iDocs? And feel free to put them in the chat if you'd like to.
Can I say something, Ella? Flaviana, were you going to say something? You opened your audio.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to ask about your book. I know that you have published a book. Would you describe in more details on how to use the iDocs to get our head around the...
Yes, I would. So by use iDocs, are you thinking about using the design process for analysis, or are you thinking about making an iDoc?
Yes, just making an iDoc and using the process of the iDoc within our research on how to present it. Maybe it's not necessarily, for the Viva, but just for future sort of references to your work and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, the book kind of takes you through those 5 different dimensions of iDoc making and gives a lot of detail about kind of what the kind of questions you should ask yourself might be, what you should consider, and it gives examples of different iDocs in order to kind of show you the different kind of potentials of how that could look. So it definitely goes into a lot more detail than I'll be able to cover in an hour today on that process. In terms of making an iDoc, there's lots of different ways of doing that. So some people, like in the projects I've worked on previously, the bigger projects, I've worked with a web developer who kind of codes the iDoc for you because it's quite a complicated interface. But what I've realised as I kind of started working with iDocs more is that a lot of people, especially academic researchers, want to kind of make iDocs in their work, but don't have the kind of time or the budget to work with a web developer. So actually what I've started doing is developing training on how you can make iDocs or things that are kind of very similar to iDocs using much more simple, low-cost, user-friendly tools. Actually, I have an event. I'm going to put the slide up here. On the 12th of May. On the 12th of May, where I'm going to be talking about iDocs and how you can make them using low-cost platforms. So if you're interested in making iDocs, that event is great to come to, because I'm going to be kind of, that's only an hour event as well, but I'll be giving kind of a taster of some more extensive training that I'm doing on making iDocs with low-cost platforms. So this event is particularly for people who want to work with iDocs but want to do that in a way which doesn't require big budgets or artists or web developers. So if that's of interest, then do come along to that.
It raises the question, some of this that we're talking about now, Ella, I think, in the academic context about publications. So we've often been quite restricted historically with the kind of traditional format of peer-reviewed journal articles and a kind of written linear dissertation for your PhD or something like that. I wondered whether you could share any insights or thoughts you've had about how, if we go through this kind of much more creative, dynamic process of doing analysis and representing findings, how that fits in with those more traditional expectations that might be put on us for our outputs.
Yes, I mean, so as somebody who kind of half left academia, I'm not necessarily the best person to feedback on that, because I've kind of I've started working primarily as a freelance researcher, so I'm kind of less concerned by those kind of like referable outputs and things. But I think that kind of one of the reasons why I frame them as an analytical process as well as an output is because I think when I was doing my PhD, my PhD wasn't a practice-led PhD. I kind of wrote a normal PhD, 1,000 words, but the iDoc making process is something I wrote about in great depth in order to kind of show how I arrived at my conclusions. So I think for me, the process is a kind of very rigorous analytical process, something that you can write about in academic publications, and the output is sort of like almost a kind of symptom of that process as much as it is an output in its own right. So I think that's for me kind of where the kind of but the outputs are really valuable as kind of a public-facing, interactive, and kind of more dynamic way of showcasing research. But in the kind of academic context, I think kind of producing outputs that showcase that analytical process is kind of where the real value is, in my opinion.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, because that's about transparency of method, isn't it? So
yeah,
historically,
exactly.
kind of qualitative researchers haven't necessarily been very good at being able to show concretely how they got from the data that they've generated to whatever that output might look like. And so this, for me, when I first heard you talk, whenever it was 6 months ago or something, I thought, this is a way that we can be transparent about the analytic process. And I think that's really, really important. And, a lot of what we do at the CAQDAS project is about thinking about how digital tools can help us with analysis. And part of that is transparency. So I think what strikes me about what you've just said, Ella, and the other questions is that it's not that we, even if we think about iDoc as representational, which of course it partly is, it's not about replacing a traditional output. It's just augmenting with different outputs rather than saying, oh, this is instead of the other outputs that we might generate. And for me, that's just also heightens the audiences that we can connect to through our work as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, I definitely see it as additional. I mean, I think there are ways people are working with these kind of formats as publications. There's a project I know at Oxford University where they're kind of making a sort of iDoc-like thing as a research output. But yeah, like you say, I think they're really valuable as a way to kind of just showcase the steps you go through to draw to kind of direct conclusions. And that's what I find interesting about kind of creative analysis in general, is that it makes something much more structured. Like, I guess, like, obviously we have kind of like coding processes and things for qualitative data, but I think in practice, and I don't know if this is just me, but I think in practice people often just kind of like do the research, they have some thoughts and they write something, and there's not necessarily a kind of concrete way of kind of articulating the steps they've gone through. Whereas something like the kind of iDoc design process, and that's why I think that the design process is valuable, even if you don't make a digital output, because it kind of gives you that framework of like, actually, I'll kind of ask a series of questions which are about kind of what the particular kind of like themes or logics of this topic are. And I think because iDocs are kind of a public facing output, you're thinking about those themes and logics in a different way. So if you're just thinking about kind of like, what do I think about this research topic, then you're asking yourself questions that are sort of theoretical and conceptual. So if you're asking yourself, what would be the way to represent the dimensions of this topic to an audience through an iDoc or through any kind of output, then you're asking yourself questions that are about presentation and about kind of experience and about what would be the sort of way to represent this. So it becomes a kind of a way of thinking from a slightly different angle, not about kind of like what's my interpretation, but about how could I convey this interpretation clearly and kind of compellingly to an audience. And for me, that's kind of very clarifying and elucidates things in a kind of in more depth than you would do without that sort of public facing output in your mind.
Yeah, so that way of thinking about it sees iDocs as the method analysis, doesn't it? Yeah. Great. We're coming to the end of our time, so let's just see if there's any other questions. I think Joe, you've got your hand up. Yeah.
Hi, Joe.
Hi. How are you? Thanks for your presentation. It's my first time to actually like hear about iDocs, so it's really interesting. But I guess I'm kind of echoing. I mean, I was actually messaging Flaviana earlier because I was like, I'm not sure what we're meant to do. But I was just wondering in terms of like, what are the ethical implications in terms of using iDocs, particularly with this kind of almost like a co-creation of data, or like someone mentioned the kind of more participative approach, or participatory like action research that using iDocs kind of mirrors. I was just wondering because you said it is like kind of like a publicly facing type of data collection, as well as the process of analysis. And as like when we are filling out our ethics forms, you have to outline particular like time frames as well. And if iDocs kind of blurs the process of collection and your analysis and onto your impact, I think that's where I kind of got lost.
Yeah, okay, I'll try and answer that in 1 minute. But so in terms of kind of the ethical implications, I mean, I think obviously with any kind of method where you're making an output, there's a question of representation and sort of how fairly people feel like they're being represented. I think in iDoc making, that's actually a lot easier because iDocs kind of inherently are about kind of bringing lots of different pieces of content together into one interface, and you don't have to tell one story. Each participant kind of voice their own experience without needing to kind of conflate those experiences into one sort of narrative about what the research found. So in terms of kind of representation, they actually can offer a way to kind of tell multiple different stories of research in a way that kind of gives each participant their own voice. So that kind of, I think, is an ethical kind of benefit of working with iDocs. I think in terms of kind of being worried about iDocs as a public output, you don't have to make it public. So the temporary city that I made, I didn't have permissions from the people who I filmed as part of my ethnographic research to use that footage publicly. So that one I had behind a password. The agreement I had was that I would be able to show kind of stills and clips of it in settings like this, but not that it would be publicly available. So nobody can kind of just go on and access that. You have to kind of know the password to that site, but the process was still valuable for me as a research process. So in terms of working with participants, you might want to consider, if you don't feel that comfortable with that being an output that's available publicly, you might want to consider kind of running the process, but then leaving it up to them what they want to do with the final output. They might want it to public, they might want to do it behind a password, they might want to just kind of have it for themselves, but not take it anywhere else. So there's no kind of, it's not necessary to have it as something that anybody can see. I think obviously you want to do a certain degree of kind of facilitation within the co-creation sessions to make sure that people sort of feel like they understand the parameters as you're kind of going through and have a kind of sense of ownership over the process, so they can make those choices. But I think that's the same in any kind of co-creative setting. And then in terms of your question about the kind of the different stages of research, I think that's kind of just about how you break down the iDoc process. So in my research, I kind of normally would have a process where you have a series of different workshops where people design the iDoc together, and then you'll go away and kind of create it. You'll show them the prototype, they give feedback. So you can kind of break down the stages of iDoc making into kind of a sort of ideation phase, a build phase, and then a kind of feedback phase, and then determination phase. So you can still kind of slot it into those different research phases, as long as you kind of like break down the timeline of creation in a way that aligns with that kind of timeline.
Okay, thanks so much. I wish we had more time, but we have come to the end of our time. So I'd just like to thank you very much again, Ella, for a really engaging and great session. And thank those of you who are here live for coming along and participating in the way that you did. I hope you found it useful. We will be making the recording available through our usual channels, and you'll get an email when that's available. Any of you who are here live who don't want your image on the video, let me know by emailing us, and we will ensure you're not on the video. But otherwise, thank you very much. Our next webinar is on the 13th of May, when we'll be talking about large language models and AI, and thinking about tinkering with them as an approach to qualitative analysis. So that's a very different topic from what we've heard today, but hopefully some of you will find that interesting as well. But thank you very much. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Ella. Those of you who are in the UK, I hope you have got sunshine and that you've got a little bit of time to enjoy that. We've got rare sunshine over here, so hopefully we've got some time now for that. Thank you very much, everybody.